The Dark Secret of WEATHEREND by John Bellairs. Chapter 9. Anthony wanted to rush downstairs right away and find out what was on Miss Eels's mind, but he hesitated. He was supposed to be confined to quarters, and if his mother caught him sneaking out, she would blow her top like Old Faithful. "Anthony, please come down," Miss Eels called again. There was a pleading, desperate sound in her voice. How could he refuse her? "Just a minute, Miss Eels," he called. He padded over to the door, opened it, and listened. From downstairs came the sound of the television. His parents and Keith were still watching. Quickly, Anthony took off his slippers and bathrobe and got dressed. Then he opened his desk drawer, took out a key, stepped into the hall, and locked his door. Mrs. Monday was nosy, but when Anthony locked his door, she usually respected his privacy. With the key in his pocket, he tiptoed toward the playroom, where he and Keith had goofed around together when they were small. At the far end of the room was a door that led to the attic, and next to it was a tall sash window that looked out over the roof of the back porch. Anthony walked to the window, unfastened the catch, and slid it open. He eased himself onto the shingles, and then carefully picked his way down to the edge of the roof. A ladder leading down to the ground was bolted to one of the porch columns for use as a fire escape. Quickly, Anthony clambered down, hurried around the corner of the house, and almost ran into Miss Eels, who was pacing nervously under the apple tree. "Anthony," she exclaimed in a loud stage whisper, "I'm sorry I had to contact you in such a dramatic fashion, but I'm afraid to use the phone." Miss Eels paused and glanced furtively around. Then she went on in a hurried, anxious voice. "Look, I'm worried sick. Something's the matter with Emerson. He left a couple of hours ago. Just left without saying goodbye. I'm really concerned about the way he's been acting lately. You know how fussy he is about his belongings. Well, when he took off today, he left his best camel's hair overcoat in the front hall closet and all 4 of the meerschaum pipes. Can you imagine? He takes them with him everywhere." "Maybe he was in a hurry," said Anthony. This was not a very helpful comment, but it was the only one he could think of. "Hurry schmurry," said Miss Eels, waving her hand impatiently. "He's never in too much of a hurry to take his pipes. We know that Borkman used his magic to hypnotize me into making a scene in the library, and we're also fairly certain that he did the same thing to you so you would give him the diary. Well, he's done something like that to Emerson." Miss Eels paused. Tears came to her eyes, and she shook her head in a grief-stricken way. "Oh, my poor brother, we've got to do something." She set her jaw and looked very determined. Then she laid her hand on Anthony's arm and stared at him, hard. "And we've got to do it soon," she added in a low, urgent voice. "You and I will have to go it alone." Anthony swallowed hard. "Alone?" Miss Eels nodded solemnly. "Who else is there? Emerson is out of the fight for now, and we can't very well go down to the police station and say, 'Excuse me, Officer Sweat, but there's a man on an estate near here who's planning to use black magic and lousy weather to wipe out the population of the world.' I mean, I'm already suspected of being a dangerous lunatic, and talk like that would only confirm everybody's suspicions. So we have to try to do what we can ourselves. We can't try to blow up the statues because it would be too dangerous. But there are other things we can do. I want you to meet me over at my house tomorrow night so we can—" "I can't meet you," said Anthony, cutting her off. "I have to stay in nights because I lied to Mom and ran off with you guys." Miss Eels stared at Anthony in disbelief. "Oh, great. Wait, I know. I'll meet you down at the library. You can go to work, can't you?" Anthony nodded. "I know I've been suspended, but I can still walk in and out of that stupid place if I want to. We need to have a place to confer because we have to go over your copy of old Borkman's journal to see if there's anything in it that can help us. I've been rereading it, and that old buzzard may have had second thoughts about the horrors that he intended to unleash. He says in one place that he who can read the riddles contained herein will turn back the storm-tossed waves. And there were other hints. I know that Emerson thought the journal was mostly nonsense, but I'm not so sure." Miss Eels paused and scratched her chin thoughtfully. "Maybe we can use One of the empty offices. Elvira Pratt owes me a favor. All right, Monday afternoon at the library. In the meantime, I'll try to work on the journal at home. Well, you'd better get back to your room before your mom finds out you're missing. God knows what would happen if she found you out here with me. Anthony hurriedly said goodbye and started climbing the ladder. Don't worry, Miss Eels, he said under his breath. We'll win. He had a sudden, terrifying vision of a world devastated by windstorms and lightning, of caved-in houses, roofless barns, and trees mowed down by violent gales, of floods and forests set on fire by lightning bolts. How was he, a 14-year-old kid, and Miss Eels, an eccentric little old lady who stuck her foot into wastebaskets and knocked plates off tables, going to stop this from happening? Anthony felt hopelessness and despair rising inside him, but he fought them down and climbed on. On Monday after school, Anthony hurried to the library as fast as he could. Miss Pratt was sitting at the front desk, and the expression on her face would have curdled him. She's up in the Winterbourne reading room, she said through her teeth. I told her to hang a room not to use sign outside so you two could be alone and do whatever it is you're supposed to be doing. And you'd better not tell anybody I let you use that room. Anthony hurried away, walking swiftly along the slippery tile floor. He stopped in front of the Winterbourne reading room, and, after glancing quickly at the sign on the knob, rapped sharply, twice. There was a pause, then the door opened just a crack, and Miss Eels peered out. When she saw it was Anthony, she flung the door wide. Hi, partner, she said, grinning. Come on in. Anthony entered, and Miss Eels locked the door. The Winterbourne reading room was small and comfortable, with a fireplace, lots of overstuffed chairs and flowered upholstery, lamps, and footstools. Not far from the fireplace was a long, old-fashioned library table. It usually stood against the wall, but Miss Eels had dragged it out to the middle of the room so that she and Anthony could use it to look at the copy of Borkman's journal. Piled nearby were books: A History of Hoosac County, Peculiarities of American Cities, and Eminent Minnesotans. There was a pot of hot coffee on a warmer, and Coke in an ice bucket. For hours, Anthony and Miss Eels pored through the books and papers. They scribbled notes and conferred about the meaning of some obscure passage in the journal. Miss Eels spilled coffee on the floor, and once when she tried to stick a pencil in the bun on the top of her head, she stabbed herself in the forehead. And as she often did when she was working hard, she mumbled to herself. She said things like, sonorous bus. Now what on earth can that mean? And Pam. Could be some friend of his, but I always heard the old coot didn't have any friends. Anthony leafed through the books and kept wishing he was smarter than he was. He tried to force his brain to work harder, but all he got for his troubles was a headache. Then suddenly it occurred to him that he was overlooking something pretty obvious. There were words and phrases in the journal that kept repeating. Sometimes the word or phrase would be scrawled across a whole page. Sometimes it would be on a page with other notes, but carefully underlined. Were these the riddles that had to be solved if the evil plan was to be thwarted? Anthony made a list of the repeated words and phrases. Pam. Pam under the crack of noon. The sign of the inverted torch. Does the sonorous bus go? For the blood is the life. There are openings in the choir of the Blessed Virgin. Anthony looked at the list and sighed. It really was not terribly helpful. Pam was obviously someone named Pamela. But as for the rest, well, it was utter gibberish as far as he was concerned. He showed it to Miss Eels, and she mumbled some of the phrases aloud. Anthony went to the ice bucket and opened a bottle of Coke. As he swigged, Miss Eels kept looking at the list, leafing through books, and jotting things down on a long yellow legal pad. Anthony glanced at the clock on the mantel. It was almost 6, and he was feeling very hungry. But just as he was about to say something, Miss Eels let out a blood-curdling screech. "This is it! This is it!" she yelled, waving the battered old volume entitled Eminent Minnesotans. "It was right here all the time. I was just too lazy to read all the stupid fine print. Look." When she had calmed down a bit, Miss Eels laid the book on the table. She explained quickly to Anthony that it had biographical articles on famous people who had lived in Minnesota and included one on J.K. Borkman. She had read it through once without finding anything interesting, but the second time she noticed a footnote number in the last paragraph about Borkman's death. Now she flipped to the back and gave the book to Anthony to read. Mr. J.K. Borkman made elaborate preparations for his burial while he was still alive. He designed his own mausoleum and gave the builders careful instructions about the decorations that were to be placed on the doors and walls of the tomb. Every detail of the building was personally approved by him. He even designed an elaborate device for sealing the tomb chamber, and the secret of this device was known only to him and the undertakers. The Borkman Mausoleum stands in St. Boniface's Cemetery in Duluth, not far from St. Scholastica's College. It is large and impressive, and is done in a combination of the classical and Egyptian revival styles. Columns with lotus-shaped capitals flank the massive bronze doors, and sculpted on these doors in high relief are 2 inverted torches. These are, as is well known, symbols of mortality. Anthony looked up. Miss Eels was right. This was important. The sign of the inverted torch was one of the clues he had picked out. And then suddenly another idea hit him, and he laughed. Miss Eels stared at him. "All right, I give up. What's so funny?" "It's just that dumb old joke," said Anthony. "Old Mr. Borkman is buried up in Duluth. And there's this joke that goes, 'Does this bus go to Duluth?' And the answer is, 'No, this bus goes beep beep.'" At first, Miss Eels didn't get it. She wrinkled up her forehead and stared off into space. "Does this bus," she muttered, and then she paused and chewed her lip. Suddenly, her face lit up. "Ha! To Duluth!" "To Duluth? Not beep beep. That's one of our clues, isn't it? The sonorous bus. If there's some way of stopping young Borkman from carrying out his father's plans, it seems we'll find it in that cemetery in Duluth. Well, that settles it. We have to go there." Anthony's head was still spinning. Miss Eels was going too fast for him. "But what about Pam and the crack of noon and the rest of the clues?" Miss Eels shrugged. "I suspect they will become clearer when we arrive at the cemetery. Are you coming with me?" Anthony felt awful. His mother would never allow him to go away with Miss Eels. But maybe he should just leave without permission. After all, Miss Eels needed him. Anders Borkman had to be stopped. Miss Eels looked at him sympathetically. She knew what he was going through, but she also knew how important it was for him to join her. The idea of driving all the way to Duluth, over 200 miles, by herself, was harrowing. Also, Anthony was good with tools, and he could break into Borkman's tomb. Without him, Miss Eels thought, the mission might end in total disaster. She took hold of Anthony's arm and stared at him hard. "Young man," she said, "a lot may depend on what you decide to do. I don't want to sound melodramatic, but you know that Anders Borkman is trying to destroy the world. Now, I could go by myself, but I'm a lousy nervous driver. And as for breaking into the tomb, well, I have trouble opening a can of beans. So a lot depends on you. I know you think your mom will massacre you if you disobey her, but if you don't come along, there may not be any mom or dad to come home to." I'm going to be making some rather large sacrifices myself. My hearing before the library board is tomorrow at noon. If we leave for Duluth tomorrow morning, I won't be there." Miss Eels paused and relaxed her grip on Anthony's arm. "You will come with me, won't you?" Anthony had never felt more miserable in his life. He licked his lips and tried to avoid Miss Eels's earnest gaze. His stomach was all knotted up, and he felt so incredibly tense that he wanted to run around the room screaming. The marble clock on the mantel ticked quietly. Finally, Anthony allowed his eyes to meet hers. He knew he ought to help her, and yet he kept thinking about the long, lonely drive up to Duluth, and the terror that surely awaited them. What if Anders Borkman was using magic to listen in on their conversations right now? If so, he'd find some way of stopping them, and the things he'd do to them would not be pleasant. So far, he had just been fooling around with them because he was sure they couldn't really do anything to stop him. But if Borkman ever thought that Anthony and Miss Eels would actually wreck his plans? Anthony closed his eyes and gritted his teeth. He was scared, but he just couldn't let his friend go alone. He opened his eyes, looked at Miss Eels, and forced his mouth up into a wan little smile. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll go with you. When do we leave?"